Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. Jerri, I love to follow AI folks on LinkedIn, and I feel like the algorithm on LinkedIn always gets me hooked up with the cool kids in AI, and I love it. I get so excited when I see people, and we've had several of them. We had Darren Coxon on the podcast. We had Michelle Pisorla on, and now we have Jason Gulya, and they all know each other. And I kind of sit on the sidelines listening and kind of chiming in sometimes, but most importantly, learning so much. So I wanted to bring Jason on today. Oh, it's so nice to meet you, Jason.
Yeah, it's nice to see both of you too. Thank you so much. I'm excited. And I love hearing the names of people who I know and have interacted with.
Yeah.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
The AI in education crew is actually quite small in some way.
I don't think education in general is able to pivot as quickly as everyone outside of education would like them to do. And I think Darren said it one time, we call it an AI revolution, but it really is an AI evolution. And that's just okay. It really is. But I feel like, especially with higher ed, there can be a little bit more of a struggle. And I want to talk to you about that today, because I feel like you are just doing it so well. What are some, I know, and I feel like with you, you have such a wonderful balance. You are out there saying, I will not use AI in this circumstance, that circumstance, or like, what is your rule of thumb? How do you judge when to use it, when not, and how do you present this to your students? And first of all, before you answer that question, let's back up. Can you tell where you teach and what you teach?
Yeah, cool. So I'll give that biographical information, and I'll kind of sort of segue into the other stuff that in many ways it kind of reflects what I do, what I do is informed by who I am and where I teach. So I teach English and the humanities, and now increasingly AI-powered communication. So I'm teaching that as an actual course, and it's cutting across all these different disciplines in many ways. So that's what I teach. So anything related to writing in one way or another, and I'm happy to put giant scare quotes around writing. Think about a little bit what that actually means right now. And I teach at Berkeley College. And one of the things that has helped me out over the last couple of years as I think about this technology and how to use it is that we are a career-focused institution. So our students come there, yes, they want personal enrichment, they want to pick up X, Y, and Z skills, but they also are very much interested in being slotted into a career. And that actually has helped me out a ton, because even when shortly after ChatGPT came out and I was experimenting with it, I got, in comparison to other colleges, very little pushback, right? Because I was able to say to my administration, yeah, but there's these worries, but there are also these indications that being able to use AI in a certain way is going to be financially beneficial. It's going to help our students have a job and hold down a job and do that job well. And I think that's really helped me. And one of the things that I will emphasize about the higher ed space is the weirdness of it. I think that one of the reasons we run into issues when talking about education and AI is when we put all education together. Higher ed is sort of its weird thing. And one of the things that's so weird is on a micro level, it's extremely easy to innovate. So if I go and I find a program today, or I learn something, and I decide to fundamentally change my course, I decide to change an assignment, to switch something around, to do something different, I can do it immediately. I can do it now. I can sit down, I can take 10 minutes, I can fundamentally revamp my courses in 10 minutes if I wanted to. So on a micro level, innovation is very, very easy to do. And there are benefits to this. And whenever I go and I teach or I train at an institution and I'm talking to faculty members about it, if I have a conversation with someone who feels like they want to experiment with it in some way, often you can see immediate benefits. A lot of colleges, I don't have to run it up the ladder. I don't have to ask anyone. I don't have to ask permission. Now, there are some colleges where this is not the case, but there is a downside to that. And the downside is that when we have these classes that are very autonomous, so we have a setting where professors can they can innovate, they can make a change at the drop of a hat. It's hard to create institutional momentum. And that's the hard thing about colleges, right? Because we all have our own silos. We have our departments, we have the classes we teach, and we very rarely connect with each other. And so one of my rules of thumb, and this will be my sort of segue, is to break out of that silo, get out of it, talk to other departments.
Only
and that
silos
can be
that with problems.
Yeah,
Only
they
silos
can
wrong.
be very isolating. And there are very easy ways to break out of them. I would say the easiest way is to talk to people. It can be online or it can be at department meetings. Just talk to other departments and see what they're thinking about it. And an even easier way to do this, especially if you're teaching in the classroom, is talk to students about it. That fundamentally changes the conversation. And when I say talk to them, I mean have an actual open conversation.
Right.
And be very honest with them if you are using AI in certain ways, because it creates trust and it creates this connection, because we're going to need that. So one of the things that I think is so tricky and underappreciated about a professor going in and talking to college students about AI is that we're professors. We have a role in the hierarchy. There's nothing I can do to make myself not a professor for that moment, but we can be open and we can talk to students in a way that is non-judgmental. And I think that's really, really important. And let students not just have a voice, but create things. So one thing that I do, and again, I know that some people might be able to do this at their institution and some may not, is I let students create an AI policy with me. Right? Instead of coming in and announcing it and saying that this is how we're going to use it, or this is how we can't use it, or this is why we're not using it. Start with a conversation. You would be surprised how many college students have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They do not know.
If they haven't done it in high school, then they wouldn't know. But
I had a conversation with my college students yesterday. Some of them had never heard of ChatGPT, ever. They don't know what that is. They do not know what that program is. Some of them might know that it's coming to iPhone soon. So I talked to a student who had zero idea what ChatGPT was. No clue. But knew that something new was coming to their iPhone, right? Knew that the next time they get an iPhone, there was going to be some AI thing in it. And that's it, right? And one of the things that we'll have to really contend with is what to do as these AI programs and these generative AI programs aren't like isolated things. It's not like going to a website. It's going to be like opening your cell phone and you're automatically in it, whether you know it or you don't. And so having a conversation with students and then building a policy from there, right? You need to get everyone kind of on the same page about what this thing is. And then you can sort of build. And that's a way to kind of do a couple things. One, it establishes that trust as much as you can, but it gives them a stake, right? It actually gives that buy-in. It allows them to actually have a say in the classroom. And I think that fundamentally changes things when you have students building with you.
Well, it's like building relationships that's so important. It really is. When you're establishing that from the beginning, it makes all the difference in the world. And now they can, instead of trying to use it to cheat, they're going to be using it in an academic way and leaning on you for support, leaning on their peers for support. You know, in K-12, that's what we do when we set up our classroom guidelines for the year. We do it with the students, right? We don't still tell them to do it. A best practice is to build it together because it's a community of respect. So that's the idea. And I think doing that, this AI policy within your class is absolutely the way to go. And especially if you are finding different levels, right? Some students who maybe are already using it, some students who, like you said, have never heard of it before. So you need to level the playing field that way in giving them each this understanding and then having them understand and maybe have a judgment on it and then develop those guidelines along the way from there. So that's perfect. I love it.
What are you hearing from students? What are they thinking about AI?
So it is a huge range. And I had a very shocking experience after ChatGPT came out. So when ChatGPT came out, I actually was going into sabbatical, which was this weird thing because I literally had 3 months to just play with the technology outside of the context of teaching. And then in the following semester, I kind of worked it in. And in that following semester, I went and I asked my students about it. So this would have been about 2 years ago, or just under 2 years ago. And I asked students about it, and there was a huge range. So if I asked students about it, I'd say 10% of them were using it and were optimistic about it. They felt like this was going to be something that would help them out. About 50% of them thought that it was the end of the world. Like it was that high, right? Students coming in and saying, this is it. This is Terminator. This is when we start to see things. We have to rein it back. We have to regulate it. Maybe we just get rid of it. Maybe this is something that you pull the plug on, right? That's where my students were a little bit after ChatGPT came out. Now, I still hear those voices. I still hear that kind of mix. I do think that it has changed a little bit. I think that the buy-in for my students in that kind of doom picture has decreased dramatically. We're talking about, half of my students after ChatGPT came out were kind of there. Now it's about, I'd say about 5% students who think that, this is the end. This is the end of work.
What do you attribute that to?
I think it is just more exposure to the technology.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that the extremes kind of feel dull at a certain point. Right. Now, I've encountered this myself too, right? After generative AI just became everywhere, became widely available, I think that so many of us tended to kind of fall on the poles. And it wasn't even that we were one or the other, is that we were going back and forth between them. So one day I would say, all right, this is awesome. I get to do this, 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 and this now. Isn't that cool? And then the next day, oh my gosh, I need to stop using this. And I would go back and forth and back and forth. And then I think that the human mind, I think for a lot of us anyway, can only do that for so long until we start to move towards the center. And we start to get a little bit more grounded, I think, with this technology. And then the other thing that has changed is different kinds of it. That a lot of my students who use AI are not using ChatGPT. They're using Snapchat, right? They're using these other programs that they may or may not know are AI. And I think that has changed it for them. It's kind of hard, I think, when you're surrounded by the technology to stay on high alert all the time, right? There's something that's it's so hard to sustain in a long-term way. So I think that that's been a big part of it. And then another part of it is just, exposure and just experimenting with it and building with it. A lot of my students are doing that. And I think that kind of changes your relationship to the technology. So for me, that's been the source more than anything else.
I'm so glad you pointed out, people, I think, just equate AI with ChatGPT. Like, that's it. There's only that. And I'm glad that you brought up Snapchat. But tell me, how does Snapchat use AI? What are some of the ways it's used that maybe we don't think about?
So it's as a friendly companion. One of the things that has shaped my students' approach to this technology is you can get them to think about it as an academic thing, but that is secondary for a lot of them right now. You have to work to actually get them to that point. So one of the ways that I get there is through Perplexity. That's kind of a shortcut. You can show them, here is something that's built specifically for research. But you need to get there with them because most of them will not start there. So a lot of my students, especially early on in the semester, they think of AI in kind of the her model, right? So from that movie, as a friendly companion that could, and this is where the worry comes from, stand in for human relationships. And they come at it from that sort of angle. That's where a lot of their experience lies. Or another way that they've encountered this is, especially at the college level, students might have used ChatGPT for research and realized, especially early on, how bad it was. They encountered made-up citations, made-up sources. I have a friend who was teaching a class, about a year or so ago, and she got a paper that cited her with a made-up resource. And it's sort of funny because she emailed the student just saying, like, this doesn't exist. And the student said, yes, it does. And there was this exchange where the student kept saying, "Oh no, it's a thing," until they realized that it was the professor who was cited. So like, I did not write this article. I know I did not write this article. And so encounters like that, I think a lot of students have encountered it in that sort of way. And so there is this kind of skepticism, which I think can actually be a good thing. It can actually help us out. But I think that for a lot of people who just take AI at its worth, right, as the gospel, and don't question it, I think that a lot of my students aren't actually there. Some of them get to that point, depending on how you're using that technology, and kind of rein them back. But there is this kind of built-in skepticism when they engage the tools, and part of that comes from dealing with and encountering Snapchat and encountering using ChatGPT for research and just have it fail really, really badly, especially early on. So I need to gradually get my students to the point when they think that, oh, maybe this could actually help with the research.
Right. So I follow, obviously I said I follow you, and you post so many great practical ideas for implementing it in your writing class. So how is it? Now, you said first that you teach them a little bit about it together. You, to help with buy-in, you have the students create with you a policy. But then when it comes down to the writing, because that's what you teach, how do you incorporate it? And how do you use it to let them write? How do you use it to teach? And then how do you use it to assess?
The first thing to think about and to really incorporate when we're using AI is transparency. Getting students to really kind of understand what this technology is about and how to use it. And another thing that I think our students need to see, and many of them are not, is an example of how AI could actually be worked into a writing process. That students, especially early on, and I'll just talk about my students, I won't generalize, but my students are very polarized. That some of them think that you can use AI for a bunch of different things, maybe even everything. And then the other side is you can't use it at all. And I have very few students, especially early on in the semester, who are in the middle, who can start to conceptualize how you can use this tool in certain ways. And I don't blame them for that at all, right? We aren't really giving them models of that. And so one of the things I try to do is I try to give them that model. So one of the things that I'm experimenting with now, and this is my way of making it concrete, and I did this last semester as a pilot in my literature class, but now I'm working into my other classes as well, is I actually last semester got rid of my final paper for my literature class. Junked it, just got rid of it. I took a look at all my assignments, and I think they were good, and there was a lot of autonomy. I gave students a lot of choice, which I love, but they felt very traditional, and they were very, very product oriented. And one of the things that I'm trying to do now, and this is so hard in an online asynchronous course, is to really focus on process. So what I ended up doing instead of the paper is I gave them a Word document, and it basically was a template. So it was a bunch of different stages. And what I was really doing was walking them through what a workflow could look like with AI. So for example, stage number 1 was free write. And I told my students, don't try not to use AI for this, because in order for it to really work, just write down as much as you can in, 3 to 5 minutes, or really, really quick. And one of the reasons that I like that is, one, it kind of puts the student at the center. It creates this kind of human-centered design, because one of the things that I try to do is I don't really believe in human in the loop. I believe in AI in the loop. I try to do that flip. I want the student at the center. And I think that a lot of times when we work AI into an assignment, we don't do that. We actually put AI at the center, and that's sort of a problem, right? All these assignments where you say, have the AI generate an essay and have the student critique it. That's useful, but AI is at the center, right? It's the creator in that scenario. So I want my students to be the creator. So I start with free write, and I give them, so Leon Furtz has an AI scale that I use. So number 1 to 5. So 1, no AI, right? None at all. Put it aside, let it sit there, don't touch it, right? This might even be handwritten if we want it to be. This is where free write is, right? That's one of the few things where I really, really want it to be just my students. And then a 5 is fully AI generated. right? And as makes sense, most steps, especially with writing, are going to be in the middle, right? They're going to be kind of 2 to 4. But for some things, you might say, all right, all AI or no AI. And so I have students free write. I tell them, one, really try not to use it. And if a student does use it, it's extremely obvious because it'll generate these like perfect paragraphs, which no one can do in that amount of time.
Right.
And then from there, I have students, mark up a text, right? Find a passage and actually use the comment function on Microsoft Word, mark it up, right? And I tell them quantity over quality, right? Just put some ideas out there. And so what I'm trying to have students do is, one, put themselves at the center, and then 2, focus on divergent thinking. My students, when they read something, they want to boil it down immediately. They want to say, this is exactly my argument. This is my idea before they've even analyzed. So this is my way of flipping it, right? Get students to diverge. And then the next step, I have as stage 3, is to converge, right? Based off of your reading, tell me some of the things that you learned, right? If you had to boil it down to say 2 things, what did you learn from that free write, from that markup? And then, and this is where it sort of changes, I give them a chatbot. I give them a contrarian chatbot. So I create the prompt myself. I did it as just a custom GPT, and I give it to my students. And it has been trained on my own personal notes, and it's there to kind of help them out. And so in the chatbot, a student gives one of their takeaways, right? One of their arguments that they kind of made, right? Again, they're at the center. And the chatbot is going to engage with them and push against it, right? And it's going to use evidence. And they give me the entire chat, right? On ChatGPT, I just have them link the entire thing, and I take a look at it, and I actually grade that. And I want to see how students are actually communicating. And one of the things that I emphasize for them is that it is fully iterative. That if a student goes in and it doesn't work, do it again, right? Give it another shot, right? There is no limit. Whatever you send me, that's what I'm going to look at. So if a student feels like, oh, this isn't going where I want it to go, they can always just rerun it. It's an experiment, and they give me that. And I go from there, and I end with reflection, right? And so one of the reflection I give them is, why does this matter, right? In a world that's dominated by efficiency, right? You go on the job and they're going to say, do this as fast as you possibly can, right? That's sort of like push. Why should we do this? Why should we be slowing down in this way? And so I try to make everything reflective for them. And then I have them, fill in answers on that template, right? Their own sort of thing. And I look at that instead of a paper. And that is meant to model for them what a workflow like this can look like, right? Because they don't, and I didn't either. So many of us are not given that sort of model. We're told yes or no, and we sort of go from there. But I think that for most of us, and this isn't just writing, this is just working, it's going to be a matter of figuring out how a tool like this fits into our process.
Right.
And we need models for how people are doing that. Otherwise, I don't see how, if you're a college student right now, you can make that decision. I think we're not equipping them to do that. And I tell them that this is just one workflow. Right? I give them models on the scale and everything, but they might find that, oh, you know what? For outlining, I actually really need to lean a little bit more on AI, right? Than someone else. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. They can kind of move that on the scale. But that needs to be the writer's decision. I cannot make that decision for them as someone who's just there outside of their own process.
Yeah, but you're modeling that they have options and they have choices and that they can determine the best case scenario to use it. And I love that. And I love the fact that you're really leveraging best practices when it comes to conferencing. And especially when you're talking about an async class, it's such a struggle. Like, how do you do that? And you can use the chats in there and talk with them, but instead you put your voice into the chatbot. And so now they're able to dialogue with it. And maybe dialogue isn't the right word because anthropomorphism is a controversial thing, so I want to talk about that too. But at least they're being coached, right? They're being coached, and it's eliminating the end product, as you said, and it's emphasizing the process. And then it's eliminating those, red lines through everything, and you're teaching the writing process through that instead of teaching the writer themselves instead of that product.
Yeah, and I also like the way that you're teaching them that there is no expert yet, that we're all learning together and growing together. And I think that's an important message. I know when Jamie and I went to college, there was the one expert, the sage on the stage, and that model has completely flipped now. And so I think that's great that you're teaching them that.
It's interesting because that's something that I come back to again and again. One of the first things I published when I was a grad student, I didn't get into an argument. I got into a spirited discussion with one of my professors. And it was about, who was in a position to really reach the students. So some students were sort of struggling with the course material. And they kind of said, that it's the expert, right? It's the expert who's able to do that. And I was like a young graduate student. I was 22 years old. I was studying. I was doing all these things. I kind of said to them that I disagreed. That actually one of the best things for students to see is someone on the in the process of learning, in the process of actually becoming, right? That I could actually say, oh, I'm still figuring this out. This is what I'm sort of thinking. What do you think? I think that fundamentally changes it, that there's something very limiting about that kind of expert model, which you kind of still see everywhere in colleges and universities. And there are very easy ways to push against that. One of them is to let students select some of the material, right? Even if it's just at the end of the semester, and that fundamentally flips that relationship, and just making it clear that, yeah, I'm still learning, I'm experimenting, and I change my mind. I think that it's important to show students how we're thinking through something. And I think that that's one of our value propositions at colleges and as teachers, right? Having students see that happen. If a student wants to be talked at, they're going to use a YouTube video, right? That's going to be 10 times more effective, just delivering content from an expert than an in-person right there in the moment. That's one of the reasons I kind of think class plans are a little bit too overemphasized. I don't know how many times I've taught without a class plan or a very basic class plan, or I junk the class plan. That has happened too, right? I create something, I get 10 minutes in and I say, you know what, this is not working. Let's try something different. And students need to see that. When I was a grad student, I always thought that was going to sacrifice my credibility and my students were going to take me seriously. And I remember once I had been teaching for a couple of years, I started to change how I taught. It was so much less about delivering content and so much more about showing students my own fallibility and how I'm thinking through this stuff. And I would literally come in and say, so, this is what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? And sometimes say, what, I think you're actually right. I like your argument better. Right. And I felt like that was going to, again, sacrifice my credibility, but the exact opposite happened. I think that there's something more engaging about that because if nothing else, what's engaging, at least for a lot of us, about the in-classroom experience, you can do a version of this online too, but that learning experience is seeing something created in front of you, not something that was created a long time ago and is just being sent out into the world again that you can kind of tell the professor has said 400 times before. I think that act of creating is intoxicating, and that's what I want to see emphasized more in the classroom, whether it's online or in person.
Yeah, modeling that learning approach that we're lifelong learners, while at the same time being that important guide on the side instead of that sage on the stage and going, being in the learning process right along with them. It's super powerful and it changes the whole dynamics in the classroom. And again, allows much more easily to put that emphasis on the process instead of that end product. I love it. Can I ask a question too about the logistics? How did you create the chat? What did you use to create it? Just in case other people are interested in doing this, did you have to pay for it? You mentioned unlimited, they could do whatever they want. So is that something that you created yourself or how did you do it?
Yeah, so I've changed how I do it. So I do pay for ChatGPT Plus. So I do have that. So I did it as a custom GPT. So if anyone who hasn't really done this yet, you can go in. If you have a subscription, you can create your own custom bot. So you can upload documents if you have them. You can create a prompt and you can give that to students. And students can use it as long as they have an OpenAI account. They don't need to pay for anything. They can have the free account, and this has changed over the last few months, but a student can actually use it. Now, that's the way that I do it because it uses the more current version of ChatGPT. Now, if anyone wants to do it but doesn't want to pay for anything, I recommend using Poe. So this,
I was just going to say, repeat that. Yeah. I created one.
That's how
Poe.
I used to do it. So before I played for ChatGPT, I used Poe. So this allows you to kind of create your own bot. You can actually choose the model. You can use ChatGPT. You can use a different one if you want to. It's totally up to you. And students can then use that. Now, the other downside of that is they have to create a free account to actually use it. But they can still engage with it. They can still send you the chat transcript, all that sort of stuff. So there are a couple of different ways to do it. And I'm hoping that more are around the corner. I use ChatGPT because it just was the best for what I wanted to do at the moment. But I suspect that Claude and other programs will come up with something that's more competitive, probably in the near future.
I hope so. I love Claude, so it would be nice to have that, that embedded.
I'm with ChatGPT right now because I like creating custom GPT. It's easy for me to send out to students. Claude, you can do it, but it's a little bit clunkier. And whenever something is clunky, especially with your students, you lose them very quickly, right? Because something's not working correctly, they abandon ship very, very quickly, and I'm fully aware of that.
Casey, I have a final question for you, a reflective one. Through all of the things that you've studied about AI and all of the ways that you've used it, what has become clear?
I think that the people really set up to do well are going to remain open. I think that in so many different contexts, real conversations aren't happening. I see this on social media, especially. I see this in person. These very closed off conversations. I was actually thinking recently about pedagogy. And one of the people who has really influenced the way that I think is Mike Rose. So Mike Rose passed away, I think a year or so ago at this point. And Mike Rose was sort of revolutionary for a very simple idea. He believed that everyone had intelligences. It didn't matter, right? Everyone had them. So he would go to factories and look at the intelligence that was being used there. He would go into all these different contexts, look at all these different things. And he was very committed to being very, very open and not judgmental about it.
Right.
That's the mindset. I think that's the mindset that helps us out, that we need to be open to inquiry. And when you go on LinkedIn, which I do love in many ways, but those conversations are not happening nearly as much as they should be, right? All these conversations that you get a sense, even just a few minutes in, that we're not listening to each other. We're not actually connecting with each other. Conversations that start off with, if you do this, you're stupid, or you're missing something, you're not understanding something. We need to, we need to be better. We need to be better about empathizing and really, truly listening before we judge. Or maybe we don't even get to the judging point. Because I think without that, I think we're just going to keep circling. I think that I wish personally that now that ChatGPT is, it'll be around like 2 years and like a couple months or something like that. So I hoped personally that we would be further in some of these conversations than we are. Right? They're the same conversations that keep popping up. And I want us to get past them. I want us to listen. I want my students to listen. And I want us to listen to students because I think without that, again, I don't see us progressing.
Yeah, absolutely. Listening and engaging and being open is 100% going to move us forward. Otherwise, we're just stuck. We're just going to be stuck. So I completely agree. Yeah, no, it's great. I think what you're doing, and you share so much with people, and I think that's so important to help this all progress. And you're learning, you mentioned so many different people who you lean on. Learning from each other is just really, really important. And that's why we wanted to bring you on to help us spread. Some of it's not going anywhere, and we need to learn how to coexist. One way to coexist, we had Michelle Ament from the Human Intelligence Movement on last month or whenever. I'm a founding member. I think, Jerri, you became a founding member, and Jason, you are as well, aren't you?
I am, yes.
I don't know if I messaged you to say, oh, you should do this or not, but in my mind, I kept thinking, he is the epitome of the human intelligence movement. Everything that you post is really all about that. And you exemplified that today when you talked about having AI in the loop and having everything student-centered instead. So the launch is coming up, and I hope you're going to be a part of it. I think that's great because your voice is very important, and we appreciate you bringing it here today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Terrific.
It was. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.